Oh, Captain, Mr. Howell would never forget you. If it weren't for you wrecking the boat, we wouldn't any of us be here.
They made you laugh. Week after week, they stumbled through sand traps, built huts from bamboo, and tried, always in vain, to get off that damn island. But behind the laugh track and the coconut contraptions, Gilligan's Island was never just a silly sitcom. It was a slow-burning tragedy, not the story on screen, but the lives behind it. When the series first aired in 1964, critics rolled their eyes. The premise was absurd. The acting, they said, was cartoonish. But the audience knew better. Something about those 7 castaways felt familiar, comforting. America was in the midst of cultural upheaval, Vietnam, civil rights, assassinations. Yet here was an island where nothing truly bad ever happened. No one got older. No one died. No one changed. But real life doesn't work like that. The actors did get older. They did suffer. They did disappear, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, and sometimes forgotten. One by one, the beloved stars of Gilligan's Island passed away, many carrying with them the weight of roles that followed them like ghosts. For some, fame was a golden ticket. For others, it was a slow, suffocating curse. Typecasting stole careers. Illness stole dignity. The island may have been fictional, but for many of them, it became a prison they could never escape. Off-screen, the skipper was dying of cancer while still visiting children's hospitals in costume. Gilligan was battling arrests and the heartbreak of being nothing more than a punchline. Mary and, the nation's sweetheart, ended her days alone, broke, and taken by a virus that didn't care who you once were. Even the millionaire Howells carried secrets, one hiding her true age for decades, the other fading away in silence while the industry he helped build forgot his name. And the professor? He survived a war, lost a child to AIDS, and used what fame he had left to fight a battle no one saw coming. This isn't just a tribute. It's a reckoning. A look beyond the palm trees and laugh tracks, into the real cost of television immortality. If their laughter once filled your childhood, let their stories live on in your memory. Subscribe, not for the fame they had, but for the humanity they carried. Alan Hale Jr., the skipper. He was larger than life, in size, in heart, in presence. As the skipper of Gilligan's Island, Alan Hale Jr. wasn't just a character. He was a comfort, a protector, a father figure America didn't know it needed. With his booming laugh and captain's hat, he steered the wrecked SS Minnow into TV history. But what most viewers never saw was the quiet sacrifice behind the scenes, of a man who gave everything to his role, and in doing so, quietly faded from the spotlight he once commanded. Born in 1921 into Hollywood royalty, his father, Alan Hale Sr., was a famed character actor who starred alongside Errol Flynn. Alan Hale Jr. was groomed for the screen from birth. He acted as a baby, transitioned into westerns and war films, and by the time he took on the role of Jonas Grummey, better known as the skipper, he was already a seasoned pro. The chemistry between Hale and Bob Denver was undeniable, like Abbott and Costello, but sweeter. The skipper's blustery shouting and open-hearted frustration became the emotional anchor of the show. And yet, when Gilligan's Island ended after just 3 seasons, Hale found himself adrift. He was too recognizable, too associated with the role. The industry, so quick to embrace him as the skipper, refused to see him as anything else. But Hale didn't complain. He embraced it. He wore the skipper's hat in public, signed autographs with pride, and even visited sick children in hospitals, always in costume. Even while quietly battling cancer in the late 1980s, he continued making these appearances, refusing to let illness stop him from bringing joy. He died on January 2, 1990, from thymus cancer, at age 68. His ashes were scattered into the Pacific Ocean, the very waters his fictional ship had never escaped. Alan Hale Jr. may have never broken free from the island in the eyes of Hollywood. But in the hearts of fans, he was never stuck. He was standing tall at the helm, smiling, guiding, and giving more of himself than anyone ever asked. Bob Denver, Gilligan. He was the face on the title, the soul of the island, the heart of a generation's laughter. But for Bob Denver, being Gilligan was never just a role. It was a life sentence in a sailor's hat. He brought the world joy through a character so iconic, so inseparable from his own image, that it followed him until his final breath. What fans saw as innocent charm, Bob sometimes saw as a trap he could never climb out of. Born on January 9, 1935, in New Rochelle, New York, Robert Osborne Denver didn't set out to become a television icon. He studied political science at Loyola University and later worked as a teacher. Acting came unexpectedly, but it stuck. His breakout came not with Gilligan's Island, but with The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, where he played beatnik sidekick Maynard G. Krebs. The show ran for 4 seasons, making Denver a familiar face on American screens. Then came 1964. At just 29 years old, he stepped into the oversized shoes of Gilligan, the lovable, dim-witted deckhand whose constant blunders kept 7 castaways stranded week after week. The show, though dismissed by critics, became a sensation in reruns. Generations grew up with Gilligan, and for better or worse, Bob Denver became him. But success can curdle into confinement. When Gilligan's Island ended in 1967, Denver found that doors in Hollywood didn't swing open, they slammed shut. Casting directors couldn't see past the clumsy sailor. His attempts to reinvent himself, in shows like Dusty's Trail and Far Out Space Nuts, echoed the same bumbling archetype. No matter where he turned, Gilligan was waiting for him. Unlike some bitter co-stars, Bob kept a quiet dignity. He leaned into nostalgia when he had to, voicing Gilligan in animated spin-offs, making cameos as himself, even appearing in a 1998 episode of The Simpsons. But the industry never truly gave him another shot. He was cast away in real life, too, typecast and overlooked. Away from the camera, Denver led a modest, private life. He moved to Princeton, West Virginia, where he co-founded a low-power community radio station with his 4th wife, Dreama. There, he found purpose outside of television, far from red carpets and studio lots. He didn't crave attention. What he seemed to crave was peace. Despite fan love, his final years were quiet. He stayed away from the media circus, rarely gave interviews, and focused instead on the people and causes close to him. He became, in his own words, just a regular guy who played a goofy role. A goofy role that never stopped defining him. On September 2, 2005, Bob Denver died from complications following throat cancer surgery. He was 70. Hollywood barely flinched. No major tribute. No primetime farewell. Just a line in the entertainment pages and a few reruns on TV Land. And yet, his legacy never died. Bob Denver gave the world one of television's most beloved fools. But behind that fool was a man of intelligence, loyalty, and quiet pain. A man who smiled for decades while being slowly erased by the very character that made him famous. He didn't escape the island, not really. But maybe that's what makes his story so human. He wasn't just Gilligan. He was the man who never stopped carrying him. Dawn Wells, Marion Summers. She wasn't the movie star. She wasn't the millionaire's wife. She was Mary and the grounded one, the kind one, the one who always seemed to hold the chaos together with a smile. Dawn Wells never had the flashiest role on Gilligan's Island, but she became the soul of the show, and for millions of viewers, the one they loved most. Yet while the world saw her as eternally youthful, cheerful, and unshakably good, the woman behind the pigtails lived a life that was far more complex, filled with perseverance, humility, and a quiet fight against the weight of being frozen in time. Born on October 18, 1938, in Reno, Nevada, Dawn was an overachiever from the start. She was a top student, a skilled debater, and an aspiring ballerina until an injury redirected her dreams. That detour led her to theater, then to a crown, Miss Nevada 1959, and eventually to Hollywood, where her natural warmth and intelligence made her stand out in a town full of flash. She was 25 when she landed the role of Marion Summers, the Kansas farm girl stranded on a desert island with 6 strangers. While Tina Louise's ginger brought the glamour, it was Marian's sincerity that resonated deepest. So much so that when the show's theme song initially omitted her and the professor, it was Bob Denver who threatened to pull his credit unless they were named. That one gesture secured Marian's place in TV history. But like so many actors in iconic roles, Dawn Wells found it nearly impossible to outgrow hers. After Gilligan's Island ended in 1967, The industry saw her only as Mary, and offers were limited, and many doors remained closed. But instead of giving up, she went to work, on stage, in classrooms, in charity. Over her career, she performed in more than 60 theatrical productions. She starred in plays like They're Playing Our Song and The Vagina Monologues, and returned to her famous role in various reunions and TV specials. In 1998, she founded the Dawn Wells Film Actors Boot Camp in Idaho, mentoring young performers trying to make it in a business that rarely makes room for sincerity. She didn't chase headlines. She built a legacy, but even that kind of quiet strength can't shield someone from life's harder turns. In 2018, Dawn's friends launched a GoFundMe to help cover rising medical bills. The public was stunned. How could Mary Ann, the heart of Gilligan's Island, need help? The truth was simpler and sadder. Hollywood doesn't pay pensions. The checks stop. The spotlight dims. But Dawn never complained. In fact, she felt embarrassed by the gesture, worried that fans might think she was asking for sympathy. She wasn't. She just kept moving. In her final years, she remained active, giving interviews, supporting charitable causes, and speaking at universities. She even became the face of MeTV, promoting classic TV not as nostalgia, but as a piece of cultural soul worth preserving. On December 30th, 2020, Dawn Wells died at the age of 82 from complications related to COVID-19. She passed during the peak of the pandemic, in a year filled with so much loss. And yet, her death struck a particular chord. For millions, it felt like saying goodbye not just to a person, but to something pure, something from a gentler time. She never turned away from Mary Ann. She honored her. She wore the role with grace, long after the world had moved on. And maybe that's what made her special. Dawn Wells didn't chase stardom. She chased meaning. And she left behind something far more lasting than fame. Love, decency, and the rarest thing of all in Hollywood, consistency. She wasn't just Mary Ann. She was what Mary Ann stood for. And that may be the most enduring legacy of all. Natalie Schaefer, Lovey Howell. She was pearls in the jungle, grace in the absurd. As Lovey Howell, the millionaire's wife who somehow maintained her dignity while stranded on a deserted island, Natalie Schaefer delivered comedy with a raised eyebrow and a razor-sharp sense of timing. But beyond the screen, Schaefer was a woman of secrets, fiercely private, unexpectedly wealthy, and far more independent than the roles she often portrayed. Born on November 5, 1900, in Red Bank, New Jersey, Schaefer got her start on the Broadway stage in the 1920s. She didn't arrive in Hollywood until her 40s, rare for any actress, but it didn't matter. Her screen presence was undeniable. She became typecast in roles of the high society matron, elegant, stylish, often comically out of touch. Films like Payment on Demand, 1951, and Female on the Beach, 1955, cast her in exactly that mold. She played the part so well because she knew it intimately, but never lived it quite as people assumed. When she took on the role of Lovey Howell in Gilligan's Island at the age of 63, Schaefer didn't tell anyone her real age. Her contract reportedly forbade close-ups and strenuous activity. Most of the cast assumed she was in her 50s. In reality, she was older than all of them. She kept it hidden for decades. Not until after her death would the public learn the truth. Natalie Schaefer was nearly 65 when the show began. But while she played a woman dependent on her husband's fortune, the real Natalie was anything but helpless. She had quietly invested in Los Angeles real estate for years and amassed a small fortune. She lived modestly, never flaunted her wealth, and when she passed away in 1991 from liver cancer at the age of 90, she left $2 million in her will to the Motion Picture and Television Hospital, enough to fund the renovation of an outpatient wing. She reprised the role of Lovey Howell in every Gilligan's Island reunion and made guest appearances on shows like The Brady Bunch, The Love Boat, and Three's Company. Her final acting credit was in 1990, playing a grandmother in a horror thriller just months before her death. In the end, Natalie Schaefer was the ultimate illusionist. She built a career playing the woman who had everything, while quietly living a life of discipline, privacy, and surprising generosity. To the world, she was a caricature of wealth. In truth, she was a master of control, of her image, her money, and her legacy. She didn't just act the part. She owned it, and no one ever saw her coming. Jim Backus, Thurston Howell 3. He was the only actor Sherwood Schwartz had in mind when creating Gilligan's Island, and for good reason. Jim Backus arrived on set already a Hollywood veteran, a household name, a film star, and the unmistakable voice behind the iconic Mr. Magoo. While most of the cast were still carving out their place in show business, Backus had already stood beside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause and made his mark in radio, television, and animation. He wasn't just playing a millionaire. He was Hollywood royalty in disguise. Born on February 25, 1913, in Cleveland, Ohio, James Gilmore Backus had one of the most versatile voices and faces in mid-century entertainment. Trained at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, he rose through the ranks during the golden age of radio, portraying pompous aristocrats and clueless snobs with effortless charm. His turn as the nearsighted, arrogant Mr. Magoo, a role he voiced for over 3 decades, became legendary in its own right. But when Gilligan's Island came calling in 1964, Backus stepped into a new kind of immortality. As Thurston Howell 3, the cartoonishly rich banker stranded on an island with nothing to spend, Backus created one of the show's most enduring characters. With his trademark drawl, velvet jackets, and relentless entitlement, Howell was absurd, but always lovable. Paired with Natalie Schaefer's Lovey, the Howells became comedy gold, out of touch, over the top, but somehow the heart of the island's weird little family. Unlike his co-stars, Backus had nothing to prove, and yet, he gave the role everything. He returned for every spin-off, every animated series, every reunion movie, including his final appearance in 1981's The Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island. By then, he was gravely ill with Parkinson's disease. His screen time was limited to a single cameo, filmed separately, but he insisted on being there. He knew what the character meant to fans. In his final years, Backus retreated from public life. The disease that had stolen his motor control couldn't touch his wit. He continued writing humor books with his wife Henny, including the semi-autobiographical Backus Strikes Back. Their marriage lasted over 45 years, one of Hollywood's rare and quiet success stories. On July 3, 1989, Jim Backus passed away at age 76, the first of the Gilligan's Island cast to go. His death marked the end of something. Not just a character, but a type of performer. The gentleman comedian, equal parts charm and satire, who never needed to shout to steal a scene. He was Howell. He was Magoo. He was Jim Backus. And he made being ridiculous look like high art. Russell Johnson, the professor. He could build a radio out of coconuts, but not patch a hole in a boat. As the calm, cerebral Professor Roy Hinckley on Gilligan's Island, Russell Johnson played the voice of reason in a sea of slapstick. The man who never lost his cool, never raised his voice, and never gave up hope. Off-screen, the real Johnson wasn't all that different. He was composed, thoughtful, quietly heroic, and perhaps the only cast member whose real-life legacy was even more dignified than the role he played. Born in 1924, Russell David Johnson had already lived a lifetime of bravery before he ever stepped onto a soundstage. As a young man, he served in the Army Air Forces during World War II. On his 45th bombing mission in the Pacific, his B-25 was shot down off the coast of the Philippines. His co-pilot was killed. Johnson survived, but both of his ankles were broken. For his service, he received numerous medals, including a Purple Heart. He returned home, honorably discharged, and used the GI Bill to study acting in Hollywood. He found steady work in the 1950s and early 60s, mostly in westerns and science fiction. His rugged good looks and serious demeanor made him a reliable character actor, with roles in films like This Island Earth, Rock All Night, and Rancho Notorious. By the time Gilligan's Island cast him as the professor in 1964, Johnson already had over a decade of experience under his belt. The show changed his life, for better and worse. He once admitted that he struggled with being typecast. After the series ended in 1967, offers dried up or came with an expectation that he play the smart one in some form. Still, Johnson didn't complain. He continued to work, appearing on Gunsmoke, That Girl, and even poking fun at his persona in Newhart. He tried to join Star Trek under Gene Roddenberry, but nothing materialized. Over time, he came to terms with the legacy of Gilligan's Island. In an interview in 2004, he said, It used to make me upset to be typecast as the professor, but as the years have gone by, I've given in. I am the professor, and that's the way it is. He embraced the fact that reruns brought joy to families. It's brought a lot of joy to people, and that's not a bad legacy. But Johnson's most profound chapter came in the 1990s, away from the spotlight. When his son David died in 1994 due to complications from AIDS, Johnson became an advocate for AIDS awareness and fundraising, a cause few Hollywood names were willing to champion publicly at the time. It was a private loss turned into public purpose, and it gave the professor something far more important than a new invention, a mission. He spent the rest of his life quietly, far from Hollywood, on Bainbridge Island, Washington. There were no scandals, no headlines, no need for reinvention. Just a man who had done his part, for his country, his craft, and his family. Russell Johnson passed away on January 16, 2014, at the age of 89. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his influence. For decades, kids watched him think through impossible problems with nothing but palm leaves and patience. And behind the scenes, he faced life with the same qualities: quiet resolve, deep decency, and unshakable strength. He wasn't just the professor. He was a real-life hero in disguise. They came to us as caricatures: the skipper, the millionaire, the movie star, the farm girl. For 3 short seasons, they made us laugh at something utterly ridiculous: the idea that 7 people could be stranded on an island and never get rescued. But in the decades that followed, the laughter faded, and the actors behind those roles were left with something far less funny: the weight of being remembered for only one thing. Alan Hale Jr. gave his heart to a role that gave him no way out, but he met it with warmth, joy, and an open hand to every child who still believed in the skipper. Bob Denver wore his red shirt until the end, quietly carrying the burden of fame that both made and erased him. Dawn Wells, America's Girl Next Door, lived with quiet dignity through financial hardship and never stopped giving back to young artists. Natalie Schaefer, behind all the pearls and privilege, left a secret fortune to help others, revealing in death a generosity no one expected. Jim Backus, the only star when the show began, returned one final time despite the cruel grip of Parkinson's, because he knew what Howell meant to us. And Russell Johnson, the professor, carried his pain with grace, turning personal loss into a legacy of compassion. They were stranded in fiction. Some of them were stranded in life. But each gave us something lasting. We don't just remember them because they were funny. We remember them because, even wrapped in the silliest premise TV ever produced, they made something real, something kind, familiar, human. So if these stories moved you, if these faces were a part of your childhood or a late-night laugh you needed once, don't let them disappear into static and reruns. Subscribe to this channel, not for the fame they had, but for the humanity they gave us. Let's keep their stories alive, before the tide takes the last footprints off the sand.